Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Miller. I'm back with you again. Last week we were talking about amphibians. This week we're going to take a closer look at a very familiar amphibian, the frog. In 7th grade, when we do dissections, we typically will use either the tree frog or leopard frog to dissect. So we're going to take a close look at those. Right now you can see these little spots on the back. These are actually called chromatophores, and they are there to help the frog blend in with its environment. This can fill with a substance known as melanin, and they can stretch out or shrink up a little bit, and this can help camouflage the frog. Now, if you take a look, this of course is the dorsal side of the frog. If we look at the ventral side of the frog, we'll see that that's actually kind of a creamy color. And that's because a lot of these frogs are aquatic frogs. And that means that they'll spend part of their time in the water. And if there's a predator in the water looking up at them, this creamy texture will blend in with the sky. If we take a look here at this bullfrog, we can see the hind limbs right here are very muscular. These are used for jumping. And then the forelimbs up here are not nearly as muscular, and they're much, much shorter. These are used to help soften the landing. So we talked last week about the fact that the toads have shorter hind limbs and not as muscular, but the frogs here, of course, they do a lot more jumping, so they need to have those muscular legs. If we take a look at the feet on those legs, you actually see that the feet on the hind legs are actually webbed. So they look almost like a flipper, and that is because, of course, these are used for swimming. If we take a look at the front feet, the feet on the forelimbs, we'll find out that the male frog actually has these thickened thumb areas, these thickened thumb pads, and those are actually used for mating purposes. If we look at the face of the frog, we're going to see a couple structures up there. One of the ones we're going to look at first is the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum. This is used to detect sound vibrations. It's often larger in the male than in the female, but they're still fairly large, usually a little bit larger than the actual bulging eyes. And then we have the nostril here, which also goes by the name of external nares, and they are for bringing in the oxygen or the air into the mouth of the frog. If we take a look at the frog's eyes, you can see they have bulgy eyes. Now this over here is actually a crocodile, but I wanted to show you this because it has a really neat video lasts about 4 seconds showing the nictitating membrane. The nictitating membrane is almost like building goggles for reptiles and amphibians. We actually have the remnants of this nictitating membrane. If you look at the corner of your eye, you'll see a little piece of tissue down there, and that's actually the vestigial remains of when at some point we probably had nictitating membranes. If you take a look at this video here, I'll show you quickly. Hopefully this will play all right. And you can see that nictitating membrane pulling across our crocodile's eyes. But you can also look down here at this slow motion toad blink, and you can see that nictitating membrane once again. Hopefully we can get this video to play okay. Watch carefully, here it goes again. You can see that little piece, that little clear piece coming across there, and that acts like goggles so they can see under the water. Take a look inside the mouth of a frog. You're going to see some very small teeth, and actually they're very difficult to see. It's actually easier to feel them. If we were actually doing a dissection, I would have you stick your finger in there and you would rub against there, and those maxillary teeth would feel almost like sandpaper, and therefore helping to grasp a hold of the prey. But the prey could easily escape through that. So instead, they also have another set of teeth here called the vomerine teeth. There's only 2 of them, but they are pointed inwards so that when that tongue grabs a hold of their prey and brings it back to the mouth, when that prey is trying to escape, they run into these very sharp vomerine teeth. Like I said, they are quite sharp. So I have had students who, when they feel these, it feels almost like they're having a pin poked through them. So those vomerine teeth are actually quite sharp. The frog's tongue is a special characteristic. Insects, they can be very hard to capture sometimes, So the tongue here for the frog is quite stretchy. It can stretch out to about 4 times what it looks like it could stretch out. And it actually produces a very sticky saliva. So let's spend a little time here watching this video here quickly with the tongue. Oops. Let's try that again. See if we can get the video to play this time. There we go. So there's quite the meal for you. Some good old insects. So if we take a look at the inside of the mouth a little bit closer, we can also see internal nares. We talked about the external nares or the nostrils. Well, this is the inside opening to that, and they can bring in large amounts of air. Of course, about 30% of their oxygen they take in through their skin, but the other 70% is forced in through these nostrils and then swallowed into this area down here called the glottis, which we'll talk about in just a moment. These eustachian tubes right here, these are the openings to the eustachian tubes. They would actually lead out to the tympanic membrane, and they kind of equalize the air pressure. If you ever gone up in a plane, you may know that your ears kind of clog up, and sometimes to prevent that, you'll chew gum or move your jaw back and forth. And what that does is it helps to equalize that air pressure on each side of that tympanic membrane or the eardrum. In this case, for the frog, when they dive under the water, this helps to equalize that air pressure or water pressure on the side of the tympanic membrane. The glottis here is where they gulp in the air that's brought in through those internal nares, and then that is carried down to the lungs. And then right above the glottis, right here, is the gullet. And the gullet is the opening to the esophagus that takes food right down into the stomach. So now let's take a look at this right here. We can see what we have here is a frog. Okay, we're going to take a look here at the nictitating membrane right there. That's the goggles. And we have the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. Then we have the forelimbs, which are not webbed. And then we have the back limbs, which are webbed. And now we take a look at the external nares, those openings. And we would now take scissors, if we were doing an actual dissection, we would put a little slit at the side of each side of the frog's jaw so we could open up the mouth. And now we can take a look inside the mouth of the frog. So inside the mouth of the frog, we have the gullet right there, which is where the food goes in. And then right below the gullet, we have something called the glottis. And the glottis is where the air that's brought in through those internal nares would be gulped down. And it would go down into the lungs there, of course. And then right there at the back, okay, you can see there's a little stretchy piece there. The tongue is actually attached to the front of the mouth so that it can actually pull the food right back to that gullet. Then we have these eustachian tubes up top there, which would lead out to the tympanum, and those are what equalizes that air pressure. There's one on each side to each tympanic membrane. And then we have the maxillary teeth that run along the upper jaw there. Those are very, very small. And then we have the vomerine teeth, which are right in between those internal nares. And those internal nares would lead out to the external nares that are shown there. So once again, internal nares, and then we have the eustachian tubes, then we have the gullet and the glottis. Then we have the tongue, and then we have the maxillary teeth and the vomerine teeth. And then we have on the outside, we have the nictitating membrane and the tympanic membrane. Now, once we cut the frog open, one of the first things you're going to notice is a heart, okay? Now, you know how we have this part right here of our chest, that sternum? That's sometimes difficult to cut through even on the frog because it's there to help protect the heart. The three-chambered heart receives and pumps blood. The atria receives blood and delivers it to the ventricle. The ventricle pumps blood through the frog. So we're going to take a look at that. This is the right atrium, this is the left atrium, and then this is the ventricle right here. So we have that three-chambered heart. These two are only receiving blood, so they're a little softer. The ventricle is a much more thick muscular part because it has to actually pump the blood. So the three-chambered heart is a little different than our four-chambered heart. Our four-chambered heart keeps both types of blood, the deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, separate from each other. But in the case of the frog, let's take a look here. We can see here, this is the right atrium, this is the left atrium, and it's divided by a little area here called the septum. Down here is the ventricle. This here will bring in deoxygenated blood, blood that has carbon dioxide in it. And then this right here will bring in blood that is oxygenated from the lungs or from the skin where it's picked up oxygen. Both of those bloods will combine together, and this is the problem. They're combining together, so it's not a very efficient way to for the blood to get pumped through the body when it's mixed together like that. Our four-chambered heart is much better about keeping those two bloods separate from each other. When we also cut it open, right below the heart, we're going to see a three-lobe large organ there. This is the liver. And the liver is very important for the production of something known as bile. Now, if we pick that liver up, okay, we're also going to see the stomach, which is where chemical digestion begins. But also right near the stomach, we're going to see this thing that's about the size of a pea. And that's called the gallbladder. And the liver produces the bile, and then the gallbladder will actually store the bile and eventually deliver it to the intestine so that it can help to digest the fat in the food that the frog eats. Then below the stomach is the small intestine. Now, the small intestine and large intestine seems like they're named kind of wrong because the small intestine is actually 7 to 12 inches long, whereas the large intestine is around 2 inches long. We're actually looking at the thickness of the organ. And in this case, the small intestine is fairly thin, but it is fairly long, and it's coiled together, and those coils are held together by some blood vessels and this filmy-like substance called the mesentery. And the mesentery is filled with blood vessels, and as the small intestines break down that food, this mesentery takes the blood vessels and picks up that food and delivers it throughout the frog. The large intestine then is at the end of the small intestine, and this is where any of the food that is not absorbed will be pushed out and into the rectum. Now also, of course, we need a respiratory system. We need something to bring in that air, and about 70% of the air enters in through the lungs. Okay, most of the rest of it enters in through the skin, but a pair of thin-walled sacs that are connected to the mouth through the glottis are what we call the lungs, and they take in air to provide oxygen to the frog. So if we watch this video here quickly, you can actually see these lungs inflate a little bit with this little pipette. So, oops, let's see if we can go back there once, see if we get this to work this time. There we go. Right, and you can actually see, if you look closely, you can see those lungs inflate when they push that in there, okay? Now, also in the frog, you'll see some fat bodies. Now, depending upon when this frog, if you were dissecting a frog, depending on when it was killed, when it died, it may have a lot of fat bodies if it was right before hibernation, or it may only have a few fat bodies if it was killed right after hibernation. So the fat bodies are there to store energy, and they can store energy that the frog would use when it is hibernating. Also in that mesentery, you're going to see another little sliver of an organ. It's called the pancreas, and that produces digestive enzymes. And something that's not shown here, also another organ, is the spleen, which is about the size of a bean and is kind of reddish brown in color, and that is where red blood cells are produced and stored. If we remove all the organs, we can actually see the back of the frog, and along the back are the paired organs known as the kidneys, and they filter out waste from the blood much the same way our kidneys do. And then the ureter will take the urine down to the urinary bladder where it can be exited out of the body. Now, to identify a frog on the outside, we will look at the thumb pads, but on the inside, they're very, very easy to recognize. The ovaries here are going to be filled with eggs in a female, and they have an oviduct which will help carry those eggs out. And then we have the male up here would not have any eggs, and instead they would have testes. Now, both of these sex cells, either the sperm or the egg, will empty out through an area known as the cloaca. So if we take a look here, right down here is the cloaca. And the cloaca is where the sperm or the eggs, or actually for that matter, urine and solid waste are all emptied out through that. Cloaca actually means sewer, which is basically what this is doing. It's getting rid of the urine, it's getting rid of the solid waste, the poop, and it's also exiting the sperm and the eggs there as well. So let's just review here very quickly. Right here we have the liver. Here we have the heart, the fat bodies, the small intestine, and then down in here, the large intestine. Now that's all we can really see here. Underneath here would be the kidneys, underneath here would be the lungs. So this gives us some idea of what the inside of the frog looks like. We're going to take a closer look at that tomorrow, but right now is your time to go ahead and answer the 8 questions on the Google form. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.